Good evening, students. Welcome to tonight's debate, the Tariff of Abomination and Nullification. Please answer the following questions in your composition book using specific evidence from the lecture. So first off, why was building infrastructure that was funded by the tariff a major cause of sectionalism in the United States? Secondly, why were Southerners so deeply against the tariff? Thirdly, what is more important in our country, individual rights or unity? Lastly, resuming your position in the Wilsonian Congress or government, being aware of a similar situation, how would you have dealt with people in your own country who wanted to leave based on a government decision? As a refresher, we want to look at the preamble of the Constitution to see where how it represents us. The preamble says, "We the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of our liberty to ourselves and our prosperity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America." So the Constitution and the United States government is supposed to benefit all citizens of the United States government. So the United States began to be pulled apart on three major fault lines: the old Northeast, the South, the old South, and the West. These were the major regions of the country. The government had acquired land through conquest, treaties, and purchases, like the Louisiana Purchase, and this made Northeasterners nervous. They didn't want this land to be sold at low prices because they feel that it would attract workers away from northern factories and make it difficult for them to make money. Westerners wanted the cheap land to attract settlers to their western lands so they could eventually apply for statehood. So right there we see conflict between the North and the West. This conflict was smoothed over by internal improvements that were created to connect the two regions, specifically roads like the Cumberland Road or the National Road, and canals like the Erie Canal. These improvements would aid the transportation of food and raw materials and manufactured goods from the factories in the Northeast to settlers in the West. These improvements, however, were opposed by the South because they were funded mainly by tariffs on imports and exports from the country. Since 1816, tariffs were on the rise because they supported northern industry. Northerners supported high tariffs because they made the goods that were manufactured here in the United States cheaper than their foreign alternatives. Southerners, however, opposed the tariffs because their economy depended on foreign trade. There was not enough factories and there was not enough industry in the North to completely support the South. The Southerners sold their cotton to foreign buyers, and they were not given money, but they were given credit, and they used this credit to buy foreign manufactured goods at a cheap price. Tariffs made this more difficult. They made northern goods cheaper, but they still weren't as cheap as original foreign goods. Now, the Tariff of Abomination means essentially a crime against nature, was passed towards the end of John Quincy Adams' presidency. This significantly raised tariffs on raw materials and manufacturing goods from other countries. Essentially, the Southerners disliked this significantly because they felt that this was a bill passed by a Congress significantly favoring the North over the South because the South would bear the brunt of the Tariff of Abomination, and Southerners claimed Northern interests controlled governmental policies and that they were getting the short end of the stick. Now, many Southerners sought a way to end this tariff, and one Southerner who came up with a plausible way to end it was, in fact, Vice President John C. Calhoun. The way that he decided to end the tariff was through a doctrine called nullification. Now, nullification was created by Thomas Jefferson when he and James Madison were fighting the Alien and Sedition Acts passed under John Adams. Essentially, what it said is that a state has the right to reject federal law that it considers unconstitutional. A state can nullify it within its borders if they feel that that law will hurt them. Furthermore, they believed that the Tariff of Abomination favored the North and that Congress had no right to favor one area of the nation over the other. Therefore, South Carolina had the right to nullify the Tariff of Abomination, remove it from the books, and not follow or pay the tariff. The South used two parts of the Constitution to argue in favor of nullification. First, the Ninth Amendment, which essentially says that just because rights are listed in the Constitution doesn't mean that people don't have other rights too. And then the 10th Amendment saying that anything that the Constitution doesn't say Congress can or should be able to do is left up to the states and people to decide. So just because it doesn't say that there cannot be nullification, that means it is actually left up to the states to decide if they can nullify laws. Now, many people believed that Jackson, a Southern slave owner, would be on their side. And so this was put to the test at a dinner celebrating President Thomas Jefferson's birthday. Calhoun puts up a toast at this dinner and essentially says, "The Union next to our liberty, the most dear. May we all remember that it can only be preserved by respecting the rights of the state, distributing equally the benefits and the burdens of the Union." Essentially saying that the South was getting the brunt of the nullification or of the tariff. Jackson, however, does not support this idea, and he steps up directly after and says, "Our federal union, it must be preserved," essentially declaring that he was now officially enemies with his own vice president. Now, nullification kicks off debates over bigger issues in our country, specifically the issue of states' rights. Do states have greater autonomy than the federal government? Do states have more influence over their people than the federal government does? On the states' rights side was Senator Robert Hayne from South Carolina, who supported nullification. He believed that it gave states a lawful way to defend their freedom. However, on the federal side was Daniel Webster from Massachusetts opposing nullification, saying states made the Union and that liberty and union now and forever are inseparable, that the states could not exist without the Union, and yet the Union could not exist without the states. Now, Jackson, being a Southerner, attempts to smooth things over by having Congress reduce the tariffs. However, this does not satisfy the South, and South Carolina threatens to secede or leave the Union. This enrages Jackson, who vows to enforce federal laws by force if necessary, and in fact, he says that he is going to hang the first man of them that he can get his hands on, in reference to South Carolinian politicians, especially his own vice president. In 1832, he runs again for a second term, but this time he drops Calhoun, now his enemy, from his ticket and picks up Martin Van Buren. After the election, that he makes it once again clear that unless South Carolina bends to federal law, that he will preserve the Union with force. It being Andrew Jackson, they take him very seriously. Senator Henry Clay puts forth a compromise tariff, and South Carolina quickly passes it in order to stay away from violence. Now, not many presidents would be able to do this quite like Jackson. It was the fear that he instilled that made South Carolina's will bend. All right, please answer the following questions using information from the lecture. Please rewind if you need to, and please remember we will be discussing your position as Wilslandian congressmen / government officials facing a very similar issue tomorrow in class. Thank you very much, and I look forward to hearing your opinions. Have a good night.